The year's 138 AD China, the capital city of Luoyang. A bronze vessel sits in the imperial court. It's about the size of a large wine jar and ornate, decorated, shaped like a ball. Around its base, 8 bronze dragons face outward in every direction. Below each dragon, a bronze toad sits with its mouth open, waiting. No one in the room is moving. No one feels anything. The ground is completely still. And then, without warning, one of the dragons drops a bronze ball from its mouth. It falls with a sharp metallic clang directly into the toad below it. The room goes quiet. The Emperor's officials look at each other. An earthquake, they are told, has just occurred. Somewhere to the northwest, hundreds of miles away, in a province no messenger has yet reached. Days later, a rider arrives from that direction, exhausted and covered in dust. There has been a major earthquake, he reports, exactly where the device pointed. The officials who doubted the machine fall silent. This is the Hufeng Didong Yi, the world's first seismoscope, built by a single man 2,000 years ago, using technology so advanced that Europe wouldn't develop anything comparable for over 15 centuries. The man behind the machine. To understand this device, you first need to understand the man who built it. Because Zhang Heng was not simply an inventor, he was one of the most extraordinarily gifted minds of the ancient world. And in the West, almost no one has heard of him. Born in 78 AD in the Han Dynasty, Zhang Heng was a polymath in the truest sense of the word. He was an astronomer who calculated pi to a degree of accuracy that wouldn't be surpassed in China for centuries. He built a water-powered armillary sphere, a mechanical model of the heavens, that could track the movement of celestial bodies with remarkable precision. He wrote poetry, he painted, he served as chief astronomer to the imperial court, one of the most prestigious positions in the known world. But what haunted him was the earth beneath his feet. China and the Han Dynasty sat on one of the most seismically active regions on the planet. Earthquakes were not occasional events, they were a recurring feature of life, capable of destroying cities, collapsing infrastructure, triggering floods and fires that killed tens of thousands. For an empire that spanned thousands of miles, the ability to know where an earthquake had struck and how severe it was not merely academic. It was a matter of governance, a matter of survival. Relief efforts needed to be deployed. Military reinforcements sometimes had to be redirected. Taxation on devastated provinces had to be adjusted. And all of this required information that, in the ancient world, could only travel as fast as a horse. Zhang Heng saw that as a problem he could solve. He spent years studying the nature of earthquakes, what caused them, how they moved, what physical effects they produced even in places far from the epicenter. Without modern geology, without seismic sensors, without any of the tools we take for granted, he developed a theory about ground motion that was, in its fundamental logic, correct. And then he built a machine to detect it. The machine, the Hufeng Didong Yi, was completed in 132 AD. The historical records that describe it, primarily the Book of the Later Han, compiled in the 5th century, are detailed enough that modern engineers have been able to reconstruct it, though the exact internal mechanism was never written down and remains one of history's great engineering mysteries. What we know from the outside is this. The device was a large bronze vessel, roughly 2 meters in diameter, shaped like a closed urn or a wine jar with a domed lid. Its surface was decorated with mountains, tortoises, birds, and other symbolic imagery. Around its base sat 8 dragon heads, each facing one of the 8 cardinal and intercardinal directions: north, south, east, west, and the 4 diagonal points between them. Each dragon held a small bronze ball in its mouth, and seated below each dragon, mouth wide open, was a bronze toad. Under normal conditions, nothing moved. The balls stayed in the dragons' mouths. The toads waited. But when an earthquake occurred, like even one hundreds of miles away, the ball facing the direction of the quake would drop. One ball, one toad, one direction. That was the readout. Simple, precise, and almost impossible to misread. The question that consumed historians and engineers for centuries was how? How could a sealed bronze vessel, sitting still in a room where no one felt any shaking, detect the passage of seismic waves originating hundreds of miles away? The answer, most researchers now believe, lies in what was inside the vessel, and in a principle that Zhang Heng appears to have understood intuitively: inertia. When seismic waves travel through the Earth, they don't just shake the ground violently at the epicenter. They radiate outward as waves, like ripples in water, gradually weakening but still physically present across enormous distances. The human body is not sensitive enough to detect these faint, low-frequency waves at long range. But a carefully engineered mechanical system can be. The leading reconstruction theory, developed through decades of experimental work by Chinese and international engineers, proposes that inside the vessel stood a tall, heavy pendulum, not swinging freely like a clock pendulum, but balanced upright in a state of unstable equilibrium. The pendulum was extraordinarily sensitive. Even the faint ground motion produced by a distant earthquake, motion too subtle for human perception, would cause it to begin to tip. Around the base of this central pendulum, a set of mechanical linkages connected to each of the 8 dragons. When the pendulum began to tip in the direction of the incoming wave, it would trigger the corresponding linkage, releasing the ball, dropping it into the waiting toad's mouth. The direction of the drop didn't indicate where you were standing when the shaking happened. It indicated the direction from which the seismic wave arrived, pointing like a compass needle frozen at the moment of impact, back toward the source of the earthquake. The mechanical precision required to build this, to balance a pendulum sensitively enough to respond to imperceptible ground motion, while stable enough not to be triggered by footsteps or wind or passing carts, was extraordinary. The tolerances involved would challenge skilled engineers even today, working with modern materials and tools. Zhang Heng achieved it in 132 AD with bronze, wood, and whatever mechanical knowledge the Han Dynasty had accumulated. The test. The machine's first real test came 6 years after it was built. On a day when the capital felt no tremors, when the ground was completely still, when no official had received any reports of unusual activity, one of the 8 dragons dropped its ball, the northwestern dragon. The ball rang out against the toad's bronze mouth and the court took notice. Skepticism followed immediately. No one in Luoyang had felt a thing. Some officials openly questioned whether the device had simply malfunctioned. A mechanical error, a flaw in the construction. If no one felt shaking, how could there have been an earthquake? The answer came days later, as it always did in the ancient world. On horseback, a messenger arrived from Longxi, a region in what is now Gansu province, to the northwest of the capital. There had been a significant earthquake, towns damaged, ground cracked, people killed. Exactly northwest, exactly where the dragon had pointed. From that moment, the Hufeng Didong Yi was accepted at the imperial court not as a curiosity but as a tool of governance. Officials began using its readings to direct resources and relief efforts before human messengers could even arrive with confirmation. For the first time in history, information about a natural disaster traveled faster than a horse. The disappearance. And then, like so many things in ancient history, the knowledge was lost. The original device disappeared in the chaos and conflict that followed the collapse of the Han Dynasty in the 3rd century AD. No technical drawings survived, no construction manual. The internal mechanism, the pendulum, the linkages, the precise geometry that made the whole system work was never recorded in enough detail to reconstruct it directly. For over 1,000 years, the Hufeng Didongyi existed only as a description in a historical text. Engineers and historians knew what it did. They had almost no idea how. The Western world developed its first rudimentary seismoscope in 1703, a full 15 centuries after Zhang Heng. The first modern seismograph, capable of actually recording the waveform of an earthquake on paper, wasn't built until 1880. Zhang Heng's device was not rediscovered or seriously studied by Western science until the 20th century. And it wasn't until the 1950s and beyond, with teams of engineers in China and internationally working from the historical descriptions, that working reconstructions were finally built and tested. Some of those reconstructions work, some don't. The exact configuration of the internal mechanism is still debated. There are multiple competing theories and no consensus on which one Zhang Heng actually used. Think about what this man did. Without seismology, without physics as a formal discipline, without metal machining tools, digital measurement, or any of the infrastructure we associate with precision engineering, he built a device that could detect an earthquake 2,000 years before the rest of the world figured out how. He didn't do it by accident. He did it by thinking, by observing the natural world with enough patience and rigor to develop a functional theory of how seismic energy moves through the earth, and then translating that theory into a working machine. Zhang Heng is not a footnote. He is one of the greatest engineers who ever lived. And the fact that most of the world has never heard his name says less about him and more about which stories we've chosen to tell. The Earth has been shaking for billions of years. It took one man in 132 AD to finally listen to it.